The way you speak to women changes the moment you stop trying to get anything from them. Not because you learned better words, not because you became smoother, but because something underneath your voice went quiet and solid. You feel it first as a pause, a slowing, a calm where there used to be urgency. Most men never notice this shift. They think attraction lives in questions, effort, timing, cleverness. But instinct doesn't listen to effort. It listens to state. And when your state changes, your words carry a different weight, even when you say less. That's why some men can speak plainly and still command attention, while others talk endlessly and feel invisible. It's not confidence as a performance. It's composure as a condition. As you listen, notice where this lands for you. Notice what it exposes. If this kind of clarity matters to you, if you value control over noise, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment to support the message so it reaches other men who need it too. Because in a moment, you'll understand the psychological principle most men never see. And once you see it, you won't be able to unhear it. Stay with me, don't move. The real shift is about to be revealed. You've stood in moments like this before, moments that appear ordinary on the surface but feel subtly charged beneath it, where the room is quiet enough for you to notice your own breathing, and the space between words feels heavier than the words themselves, as if something important is deciding whether or not to reveal itself. You're across from her, not performing, not leaning forward emotionally or verbally, not reaching for momentum out of habit, and for the first time you recognize that nothing is missing, even though nothing is happening in the way it used to. In the past, this would have been the point where your mind quietly accelerated, where you would begin scanning for the next move, the next question, the next opening to keep the interaction alive, mistaking motion for presence and engagement for depth, unaware that every unnecessary word was subtly announcing urgency. But now, something inside you has shifted its center of gravity, and you remain where you are without tension, without effort, without the internal push that once told you silence was dangerous. You are not withholding speech as a tactic, and you are not waiting for permission to speak. You simply no longer feel the need to stabilize the moment with sound, because the moment no longer threatens your sense of self. And before she consciously understands what has changed, her body responds to it. Her attention sharpens in a way that feels involuntary. Her posture adjusts almost imperceptibly, and her awareness turns toward you not because you said something impressive, but because you didn't interrupt the space with reassurance-seeking behavior disguised as conversation. This is where most men misunderstand what presence actually is. They believe it is created by contribution, by constant engagement, by demonstrating value through output, never realizing that real presence emerges through subtraction, through the quiet removal of internal need, through the absence of psychological reaching. You didn't decide to become still. Stillness arrived when you stopped using the interaction as a mirror to confirm your worth. Earlier in your life, conversations felt like negotiations you didn't know you were participating in, where every sentence carried a hidden request for validation, and every pause felt like a threat that needed to be neutralized. And although you may never have articulated it this way, your nervous system knew exactly what it was doing. Women sensed it as well, not through conscious analysis, but through instinctive pattern recognition, registering movement without direction, effort without grounded intent, and attention that was quietly asking to be rewarded. But now, your body remains settled, your breathing unbroken, your words no longer lining up in advance as if waiting for inspection. And the absence of urgency begins to reorganize the interaction without you touching it. You speak only when there is something to say, not because silence demands intervention, and when you do speak, your words arrive fully formed, carrying the weight of someone who is not bargaining for reaction. This is where the geometry of power begins to change. She is no longer responding to your momentum or adjusting to your energy. Instead, she finds herself orienting toward your stillness, subtly recalibrating her attention around the fact that you are not trying to move the moment anywhere. Curiosity shifts from being entertained to being activated, not because you pulled it forward, but because you stopped pushing against it. This is the form of influence most men never recognize, because it cannot be practiced without first being earned internally. It does not announce itself, it does not demand recognition, and it does not rely on dominance or charm. It exists quietly in the absence of need, in the way you stand when nothing is happening, in the way your voice remains level and unhurried, in the way you allow moments to complete themselves without interference. A composed man does not chase connection, because he does not need it to confirm who he is. He allows connection to emerge naturally, as a response to his grounded presence rather than his effort. And that nearly invisible difference, the one no tactic can replicate, begins to reshape not only how she perceives you, but how you experience yourself in the interaction. You start to notice that you are no longer measuring your words against reactions, no longer tracking approval, no longer negotiating your value in real time, because you are speaking from alignment rather than anticipation. This is the earliest form of true authority, the kind that does not seek agreement and therefore often receives it, the kind that settles into the room without resistance. And this is only the surface layer, because once you fully understand what is shifting beneath your voice, you'll realize that this transformation has very little to do with conversation itself, and everything to do with who you are when nothing is required from you. Stay with this. What comes next is the mechanism that makes this change permanent. As this internal stillness settles into you, not as an act but as a condition, you begin to observe a quiet reordering in the way interactions unfold around you. Changes subtle enough to be dismissed at first as coincidence, yet persistent enough over time to reveal a deeper pattern that no longer feels accidental. Conversations start to breathe differently in your presence, not because you guide them, but because the pressure that once crowded the space between words has dissolved, allowing moments to stretch naturally without resistance. And in that openness, something unforced begins to move. You notice that women start occupying the silence you no longer rush to fill, that their engagement deepens without being invited forward, and that the rhythm of interaction slows into something steadier and more deliberate, as though the absence of urgency has given their attention room to settle rather than scatter. What has changed is not your expressiveness but your reactivity, because the impulse to advance, to secure, to stabilize the moment through effort has quietly withdrawn, leaving behind a grounded neutrality that no longer seeks confirmation. Most men never experience this shift because they confuse motion with value, believing that attraction must be maintained through constant input, emotional signaling, or verbal engagement, and fearing that stillness signals loss or disinterest. They compensate by offering more than the moment requires, unknowingly revealing their dependence on outcome. You no longer participate in this exchange, not as a strategy or a withdrawal, but because your center has moved inward, anchoring your attention to something stable enough that silence no longer threatens your sense of self. This anchoring alters the frame of every interaction without announcement, because when a man stops leaning emotionally, the emotional field reorganizes itself around him, subtly but decisively. Without consciously deciding to do so, she begins adjusting her orientation toward you, her questions emerging earlier, her tone softening, her attention lingering not as a chase, but as a response to the absence of pressure, as though the interaction itself has shifted its point of balance. What you're witnessing is not a technique unfolding, but gravity asserting itself, the natural pull created when effort recedes and presence remains, and this becomes most apparent precisely when you no longer care whether it happens at all. That indifference is not detachment, but sovereignty, because interest no longer defines the moment, and even when it appears, you do not rush to meet it, mirror it, or capitalize on it, allowing it to exist without feeding it, which reveals a form of power most men never encounter. This is where Machiavellian insight surfaces quietly, stripped of caricature and theatrics, appearing instead as a simple recognition that influence flows most strongly from those who are not compelled to exercise it, and that the man who requires nothing cannot be easily steered. Women register this absence of compulsion beneath conscious thought, sensing when a man's center is internal rather than reactive, when his attention is deliberate rather than automatic, and when his composure does not fluctuate with response, triggering a reassessment that has nothing to do with attraction as a goal and everything to do with orientation. She begins watching more closely, listening more carefully, not because your words have changed, but because they no longer arrive tethered to emotional intent, transforming your presence from a request into a quiet declaration of completeness. This completeness introduces a form of uncertainty that is neither insecurity nor confusion but intrigue, because it removes familiar cues that once made interaction predictable, leaving no eagerness to manage, no validation to reward, and no emotional tension to resolve, only a balanced stillness that carries unexpected weight. You do not dominate the space or attempt to command it, but you stabilize it. And stabilization is rare enough that it naturally draws attention without demanding it. As this pattern continues, you become aware of a deeper transformation unfolding within you, one that extends beyond women entirely as your investment in controlling perception begins to loosen and the mental rehearsal that once followed every interaction gradually fades. You stop replaying conversations in search of approval or correction. Stop measuring your performance against imagined standards and begin experiencing a steadier internal rhythm that persists whether you are observed or alone, signaling a shift from emotional dependence to emotional ownership. This is the Stoic principle most men misunderstand, not suppression of feeling but command over it. As you cease outsourcing your internal state to external reactions, allowing your nervous system to settle into consistency rather than oscillation. From this steadiness, your gaze no longer searches, your voice no longer negotiates, and your presence no longer fragments, creating a coherence that others respond to instinctively rather than intellectually. Women do not fall for this condition. They respond to it, and that distinction matters, because response implies inevitability rather than pursuit, revealing that what appears as attraction is often simply the removal of noise that once obscured it. The difference between men who chase and men who are pursued is not confidence or skill, but internal architecture, with one driven by hunger and the other by alignment. And alignment produces consequences that extend far beyond conversation or dating. It reshapes how you endure uncertainty, how you navigate conflict, and how you occupy space in rooms that once demanded effort, as the same internal shift that altered your speech begins governing how you move through life itself. You no longer feel compelled to explain who you are, trusting instead that time paired with composure will do that work more accurately than urgency ever could, transforming time from a threat into an ally. This is where the change becomes structural rather than situational, where the shift beneath your voice quietly rewrites your identity without announcement or performance, preparing you for the final layer that most men never reach, where restraint matures into something even heavier. That is where this is leading. Stay with it. As restraint deepens into something more permanent, you begin to recognize that what once felt like control has quietly transformed into orientation, a stable internal alignment that no longer requires monitoring, correction, or effort to maintain, because it has become the default position from which you engage the world. You notice that situations which once provoked reaction now register as information, that emotional spikes flatten into signals rather than commands, and that your responses emerge slower, heavier, and more deliberate, not because you are suppressing impulse, but because impulse no longer governs you. This is the final inversion most men never experience, where discipline stops feeling like resistance and starts functioning as clarity, allowing you to see moments as they are rather than as threats to be managed or opportunities to be seized. Women sense this clarity immediately, not as attraction in the familiar sense, but as orientation towards something solid, because a man who is internally aligned does not enter interactions seeking resolution, validation, or momentum, and therefore cannot be pulled off center by emotion, expectation, or uncertainty. At this stage, her reactions no longer influence your behavior at all, and paradoxically, this is when they become most pronounced, because attention naturally gravitates toward what remains unaffected by it, and curiosity intensifies around what cannot be easily moved. You are no longer navigating interactions as sequences to be optimized, but as moments to be inhabited fully. And this shift changes not only how others respond to you, but how time itself feels in your presence, slowing when necessary and passing without friction when nothing needs to be extracted from it. This is the condition ancient philosophers gestured toward without naming directly, the state in which a man governs himself so completely that external forces lose their leverage, rendering persuasion unnecessary and resistance irrelevant. Power here is not expressed through dominance or withdrawal, but through consistency, because a man who remains the same across changing conditions becomes a reference point rather than a participant, and reference points shape environments without effort. You recognize now that attraction, respect, and influence were never things to be generated, but consequences of alignment, byproducts of a nervous system no longer fragmented by need, and a mind no longer preoccupied with outcomes. What once felt like silence now feels like depth. What once felt like stillness now feels like command. And what once felt like detachment now reveals itself as presence without distortion. This is why nothing about your words truly changed, even though everything beneath them did, because language was never the source of power, only its surface expression. You carry this forward quietly, without needing to explain it, knowing that those who recognize it will respond, and those who don't were never meant to be convinced. And once this orientation locks in, it does not fade, because it is no longer something you do, but something you are. A settled authority that moves with you regardless of who is watching. That is the internal shift. And now that you've seen it, you understand why you will never speak the same way again.